This will sound very strange, but the new Christopher Nolan movie Oppenheimer, a movie about the Manhattan Project to develop the first nuclear bomb, is a prophecy from God that is predicting that a suitcase nuclear bomb will be detonated in Manhattan on September 25th, 2023. As well, the new Jamie Foxx movie, They Cloned Tyrone, that was released on the same day as Oppenheimer, is also part of this prophecy. As well, Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans are also part of this prophecy, as is the fire on the roof of the dome where the New Orleans Saints football team plays, part of this prophecy from God that is predicting that a suitcase nuke will be detonated in New York City on September 25th, 2023, as is the Manhattan blackout in 2019 and the official start date of the Manhattan Project, part of this Oppenheimer movie prophecy, a movie about the Manhattan Project to develop the first nuclear bomb, that is predicting that a suitcase nuke will be detonated in Manhattan on September 25th, 2023, as is the first nuclear bomb ever tested, the Trinity bomb that was tested in July of 1945, part of this prophecy that is from God, as is the date that the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan, the historic area of the hidden Christians in Japan, part of this prophecy that is from God, as is the Great American Eclipse that passed over America in 2017, and the arrest of the 21-year-old document leaker in April of 2023, part of this prophecy from God that is predicting that a suitcase nuke will be detonated in New York City on September 25th, 2023. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, what you are looking at here is a truly profound diagram that connects some of the most important signs in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. The theme of this video will be, for the sake of having a theme, the Oppenheimer movie that was released on July 21st, 2023. The Oppenheimer movie is about the man named Oppenheimer who led the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bomb. Okay, and as I will explain, the Manhattan Project, the official start date of the Manhattan Project, will in fact connect to all of this. The Oppenheimer movie, one thing about it is that it was shown in IMAX theaters, and it was said in the news, a part of the news story is how this unusual film required 11 miles of film that weighed 600 pounds. And that hinted at 6 times 11 equals 66. Furthermore, the 11th triangular number is 66. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 11th row is 66. This is important also because of the relevance of the number 11 at the spiritual founding of America. There have only been 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God, Israel and America, and it took 66 days for the Mayflower to cross the Atlantic. And they saw their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous to the Israelites crossing the desert and the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And before John Winthrop disembarked and those with him in the 11 ships disembarked their ships, John Winthrop delivered his famous City on a Shining Hill speech, which was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, which was the words that Moses gave from God to the Israelites before they entered the promised land regarding God's promises of blessings and curses. The number 11 from the Bible symbolizes God's promises of blessings and curses, and it occurs also in context of the execution of God's judgment. So there was 11 ships in John Flotilla's, in the flotilla, in John Winthrop's flotilla, and also the Mayflower had or arrived with 101 passengers, which also hinted at the number 11, and that was after 66 days. And again, the 11th triangular number is 66. The reason for saying this is, of course, because when this happens, the predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan, or bombs plural, on September 25th, 2023, it will be a promise of curses on America for having departed from God, as God promised. And so that's why it's 66 days. This is important. Also, the book of Revelation is the 66th book in the Bible. And the number of the Antichrist is 666. That's why we have, on the same day of the release of the new Oppenheimer movie, the release of the new movie with Jamie Foxx. God has been using Jamie Foxx in his signs, which is explained in another video, which you should watch. But this is part of the signs. The release of this movie is titled Cloning Tyrone. And I'll explain why that's relevant in a second. But Fox, the name, hints at 666. That's why this is relevant with this 66 days connection, and why the release of this movie was on this date, because it connects with 66 days. Because F is the 6th letter in the English alphabet, O is the 15th, and that hints at 1 plus 5 equals 6, and X is the 24th letter, which hints at 2 plus 4 equals 6. So that's why Jamie Foxx. Jamie Foxx is a 666 Antichrist sign. Okay. Also, Tony Bennett died on this same day. Tony Bennett died in Manhattan. The dirty bombs are predicted to explode in Manhattan. He was also born in New York City. And furthermore, he was born on an island. And I'm predicting that there will be an evacuation from Manhattan Island, because that is what God is communicating through his big picture of signs. Tony Bennett is known synonymous with Las Vegas. He is like a Mr. Las Vegas, if you will. And he was a fixture in Las Vegas for decades. He's legendary in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, in God's signs and in general, is symbolism for nuclear bombs. And furthermore, the Manhattan Project and the Nevada test site, which was just 60 or so miles north of Las Vegas. And it's home to the National Atomic Testing Museum, for example, as well. So Las Vegas is synonymous, or rather symbolism, for nuclear bombs, and that's also why, because a dirty bomb is nuclear material with a conventional explosive. And that's why Tony Bennett died on the day of the release of Oppenheimer, 66 days before the predicted dirty bombs. Now, more is explained in the Tony Bennett video. Make sure you watch that video. It's a very interesting video. Also, this was the day of the Halifax flooding, the epic Halifax flooding on this date, which the Premier of Nova Scotia emphasized how there were six bridges that were taken out due to the flooding. He said the number 6 twice. I'm quoting him. He said there are six bridges. So he said it twice, which hints at the 66 days connection. The reason why this is relevant is because, as explained in the must-watch Halifax explosion video, the Halifax flooding God used as a prophetic sign to point back to the Halifax explosion during World War I, which at the time was the largest man-made explosion, 1/5 of the explosive power of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. It still is today one of the most explosive, biggest explosions, man-made explosions. And so make sure you watch that other video as well. And so here we have our introduction here. We have the relevance of this date, July 21st, 2023, and these signs that occurred in conjunction with the release of the Oppenheimer movie, which the film for which was 11 miles long, weighing 600 pounds, which hints at 6 times 11 equals 66. Now, the thing is, what occurred to me this morning, which led to all of this and all of the pieces of the puzzle, or in this particular case, because this is just not even scratching the surface, of course, of God's true big picture of science. This is I don't know what to call it, even a fraction. It's not even a fraction. But anyway, this all came together, all of these signs, this morning after I woke up with this on my mind for some reason, which is that this date here is 66 months after this prophetic sign. And that led to more inspiration, which led to this, because I had never really fully understood why this was 44 months exactly after this, because this was realized in September of 2021 or around then, but it was put on the shelf and not further looked into until now after this inspiration. And that led to all this, as you'll see. So why is this important? Well, first of all, it confirms the 66 days connection, this 66 months connection. That's one of the purposes. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And so this is a second witness, this 66 months followed by 66 days. Furthermore, again, the 66 months connects to the Oppenheimer release, which again is hinting at the number 66, as I explained. All right, so this 66 months is a second witness to the 66 days connection. And again, 66 is the number of books in the Bible, with the last one being the book of Revelation, in which the Antichrist is described, whose number is 666. And that's why we have this connection back to this prophetic sign here, which was the day that Space Lab, or Rocket Lab is the name of the company in New Zealand, launched their promotional Star of Bethlehem. Well, so that's what I and others have nicknamed it, because they called it the Humanity Star, and it was this metallic geodesic type of shape satellite that was supposed to orbit the Earth and reflect and sparkle in the night sky. And it was said to have a philosophical message, which was essentially humanism, which is Antichrist. The humanism and human religion is elevating man to the level of God, etc. There is no God, and man can achieve wonders on their own with their technology. It's an allusion to the story in the Bible, the Tower of Babel. Very important story in the Bible that, in fact, describes our current time. So anyway, this Humanity Star, which was essentially the Star of Bethlehem, the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, because Jesus arrived after the star Jesus was born after the Star of Bethlehem, and his first coming, in other words, the Star of Bethlehem heralded Jesus' coming, his first coming, and therefore this Antichrist Star of Bethlehem would be heralding the birth of the Antichrist. In fact, part of it was that the satellite was supposed to remain in orbit for 9 months before falling back to Earth. It ended up not making that 9 months, but 9 months is symbolic of a birth. And of course, this company didn't know the symbolism in 9 months when they did that. Otherwise, they would probably maybe connect the two effect to it being, obviously they didn't, because that's what it is. It's symbolism for the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, and of course they didn't know that. So also it did fall back to earth, and it fell back on another prophetic date. Anyway, I'm forgetting the details, but I think it coincided with the fall of China's lab from space too, and China is the red dragon, and the birth is in Revelation chapter 12. The birth that the woman gives in Revelation chapter 12, while the red dragon is waiting at the woman's feet, ready to devour the child. And so China and China space signs are red dragon signs, because the red dragon in that chapter also is thrown down from heaven to earth, and space is the second heaven. And so a China space lab, a red dragon space lab falling from heaven, the second heaven to earth, is obviously symbolism for the red dragon being thrown down from heaven to earth. So anyway, this was the day of the launch of the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem. And there's more confirmation to this. In fact, this connected with exactly 40 weeks, which according to the medical profession is the average human gestation period, which is why God uses 40 weeks in his connections, because when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And so 40 weeks exactly after this was the baseball game, the World Series Game 4, 40 weeks, which was all about the 4-0 blown lead. The big news story about that game, which in fact God's trumpeted about. And he mentioned in his tweet, his trumpet, about the 4-0 blown lead by the Dodgers. That 4-0 blown lead hinted at 40 weeks. 4-0 is 4-0, which hints at 40 weeks. And that game 4 and the 4-0 blown lead sign was exactly 444 days after the Revelation chapter 12 sign in the night sky, which again is depicting a birth. Okay, that more is explained regarding that. That World Series, in fact, began with double rainbow over Fenway Park and followed the next day, right before Game 1 was to begin. And then the next day, right before Game 2 was to begin, another double rainbow appeared over Fenway Park. That was a second witness. The rainbow is God's sign regarding judgment in the account of the flood in Genesis. And anyway, in the account of the flood waters increased for 40 days. And this game, or these games, were in Massachusetts, in Boston. And 40 days before that were the Columbia Gas Company explosions. Big news story. There was a bill passed in U.S. Congress named after the one person that died in the Columbia gas explosions. God uses the name Columbia in his signs as symbolism for America, making this a judgment warning sign for America. And furthermore, so is Boston. The spiritual founding of America was in Boston, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And that person that died in his car, a 16-year-old, after he'd just gotten his driver's license, celebrating the fact that he got his driver's license with a couple of friends in his minivan in the driveway of his house, when a chimney collapsed on him. And that was 110 days after the Chimney Rock sign. And I'm going off onto a rabbit trail, and that's how God's big picture of science works. It's actually extremely difficult to explain, because when you try to explain it, you end up pulling the entire web, because it is an internet-connected web. And so that will be explained more in other videos that further down that rabbit trail. It also connects to the Centennial Park explosions at the Olympics in Atlanta in 1996. Okay, so the chimney rock that collapsed, the chimney that collapsed on the guy in the driveway, was 110 days after the Chimney Rock sign, which was the collapse of the retaining wall in Chimney Rock State Park in North Carolina, near the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse. Now, a retaining wall collapse is symbolism for Joshua, because Joshua led the Israelites around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. And Joshua died at the age of 110. And so that's why from the retaining wall collapse in Chimney Rock, it is 110 days to the chimney collapse on the person in the prophetic sign in Massachusetts, because the Columbia gas explosions were in Massachusetts, if I failed to mention that. And then 40 days later was the World Series in Massachusetts and the double rainbows, hence the 40 days. But the day that the chimney collapsed, the chimney rock sign, and rock symbolizes Jesus in the Bible, was Pentecost, and Pentecost is symbolic of the church. It was the Feast of Pentecost. That was May 27th, 2018, and there were other prophetic signs, including the once in 1,000 years flooding, which actually occurred 666 days after the other once in 1,000 years flooding in Ellicottville, Maryland, and on and on. And anyway, those signs on that day were 120 days after the 100 old-growth trees mysteriously collapsed in Olympic National Park, giving it national symbolism. And that day was January 27th, 2018. 120 is the number that symbolizes Pentecost, because on Pentecost there were 120 disciples in the upper room, hence the 120 days from the tree collapses to Pentecost and the Pentecost signs that I just explained. Now, the 100 old-growth trees, these trees would have been alive at the time of the founding of America, at the beginning of the nation. And therefore, also in the Bible, trees that fall are symbolism for spiritual death and judgment. And so these trees mysteriously fell. The scientists still don't know what happened. They snapped like twigs, and the way they collapsed, it's unexplainable what sort of wind caused it. But anyway, 100 old-growth trees collapsed mysteriously in Olympic National Park. I figure it's, of course, a sign from God. Somehow God did something supernatural with the collapse of these trees, or rather arranged some kind of unprecedented wind phenomenon. But anyway, that sign on that day, which was January 27, 2018, was exactly 21 years and 6 months after the Centennial Park explosions in Atlanta that killed 111 people. That 111 people, injured 111 people, and I believe killed one person. But all those ones are a hint or confirmation for the 100 trees that mysteriously collapsed. For all we know, it was 111 trees, because of course 100 is a rounded off number. So it probably was, in fact, 111 trees, knowing God. But it was never reported as such in the news. But anyway, 21 years and 6 months between the Centennial Park explosion at the Olympics is hinting at 216. 21 years, 6 months hints at 216. And 216 equals 6 times 6 times 6. And 666 is the number of the Antichrist. Furthermore, the Antichrist, the 44th president, was born on the 216th day in the calendar year, August 4th. And so that's why, so there you have it. There you have, I just went off onto a complete rabbit trail, but I explained how the Centennial Park explosions connect to the predicted explosions in Manhattan. And furthermore, that trail that I just explained goes through, actually I didn't fully explain it yet. That trail goes through, though, the Columbia gas explosions, as I just explained. But what I'm explaining here is that, let's see. This date here was 2 times 3 days, which ends at 23, before the old growth trees collapsed. And God pairs 23 and 44. So there's a very good case to make that this is in fact also how that trail of signs that I just explained, the Centennial Park explosions, connect here, because as I'll explain in a second, this is a 44 months connection, which would pair with the 2 times 3 days. Okay, and that's not far-fetched if it seems like it, because, and I don't blame you if you think that, because you don't know what I know. And I have been studying God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections full-time hours from morning until night, nonstop for 6 years. And anyway, when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove these things that may seem like a stretch to someone that's new to this, but it isn't. God uses 2 times 3 to hint at 23. That is a fact. And anyway, and that's how God's big picture of signs works, as I explained a minute ago. It works on the principle of second witnesses, which is through pairing certain numbers together. The reason why he pairs 23 and 44 is because the 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school, and will become the president again in 2023. And that's just scratching the surface of why. There was also just another example, the GOAT, greatest of all time of basketball, who is from Chicago, the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan, just like Obama is from Chicago, and also wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball. Michael Jordan also played for the U.S. Dream Team, and he wore jersey number 9, but that Dream Team in the Olympics, come to think of it, outscored their opponents by an average of 44 points. And anyway, the reason why he wore jersey number 9 is because Obama became president in 2009, and on and on. Okay, so, but let's see. Actually, I will explain it in another video. How the World Series, which again, this connects 40 weeks to the 4-0 blown lead, how that date in turn, it's actually already explained in the must-watch Fever Pitch video. The movie Fever Pitch is a prophecy from God. If you want to see the connections from that date, you can watch that in the Fever Pitch video. But there will also be another video with a different set of connections from the World Series in 2018 that connect, as I just explained, the Columbia gas explosions and the Centennial Park explosions to the predicted date that the dirty bombs will explode in Manhattan on September 25th, 2023. Okay, now let's return back to this diagram here. Okay, so now we have the 66 months connection and the 66 days connection to the Oppenheimer movie, which again hints at 66. Again, 66 is Antichrist symbolism. That's why it connects with the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem. The Antichrist is the 44th president, which is why from this Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, which again connects to the 4-0 blown lead and all of that. Oh, and the pitcher that blew the lead was pitcher number 44. How could I forget? And it was also the same day as the synagogue shooting. The pitcher's name was Rich Hill, and the media kept reporting how the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh was in the rich neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Squirrel Hill, and 4 police officers were wounded, and that was the day of the 4-0 blown lead by Rich Hill, when Rich Hill was taken out of the game too early, which God's trumpet criticized the manager for doing. Okay, so anyway, you have all these, so it's 44 months, okay, to this date here. Now here we get into some exciting, interesting things here. This was the day of the New Orleans Saints football team fire at the Dome. They play in a dome in New Orleans, and the roof of the dome caught fire. It was a big news story. It was a national news story. It wasn't just a small fire. So the roof caught fire, and this was on the same day as the first day of the annual opening of the General Assembly of the United Nations, which is in New York. As a result of this fire and Hurricane Ida, which I'll explain in a second, the opening game was not played in New Orleans in week 1. And then week 4 was the next game that the New Orleans Saints football team was scheduled to play in New Orleans. And as a result of this fire and the damages from Hurricane Ida, that game was also in question. That game was against the New York Giants, okay, which is a team from New York. And the UN is in New York. And the opening game, which was the big story regarding the New Orleans Saints, and not having an opening game of the season, this fire coincided with the opening of the UN, hence why the game in question was against New York. Okay, so I'll explain that in a second here. Now, I'm going to actually come back to this at the end, because this is going to predict the day that the alien deception will begin. Okay, it's going to prove that this will be why this is known ahead of time. Okay, now, so the Saints team, God is using in his signs as symbolism for the American church, which God is very, very displeased with. In fact, this is the reason for the Antichrist and the end times. It is a test of faith for the church, but it's now because God is very, very displeased with the church. And you will only hear that message on this channel, pretty much. And that's another reason why God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections are only being explained on this channel. And why God has given me a voice through these predictions. Because I'm really the only one that's talking about how God is very, very displeased with the church. Well, I'm sorry, I take that back. There are a lot of people actually talking about that now, these days, given recent times. But back when this first was learned, I didn't really know of anything regarding that. We're talking about 5 years ago, before the CVD disease and before the shoplifted referendum. So anyway, God is very displeased with the church, and these are judgment signs for the church. And the reason why it's a roof fire, this is one of many roof fires, church roof signs, church roof destruction signs, because it hints at Pentecost, which symbolizes the church. Because that's the disciples on Pentecost were in the upper room, which is why these roof destruction signs, including this saint's dome. And the dome, by the way, is a play on words in the media, the dome coming, as in the homecoming, which hints at the second coming, the homecoming of Lord Jesus Christ, which the church needs to be prepared for, hence this judgment warning for the saints. And saints, if you're not a Catholic, doesn't refer to the supposed saints that are made saints by popes. Saints in the Bible, actually, I shouldn't say actually, if you aren't a Catholic, it's known and very clear that saints does not refer to what Catholics think of as saints. It refers to every believer. That is, every single believer is a saint. The word saint is used in the Bible in reference to every believer, is what I mean. Now, the Antichrist, 44th president, will persecute God's people through the mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolized by the number 22. And that's why 66 is 44 plus 22. And that's why we have this in this connection right here. It's astounding. Now, 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist would have been described in Ezekiel chapter 9. And it would have been a Tav mark. And the Tav letter in ancient Hebrew, the Tav letter is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet and the 22nd letter in the alphabet. And the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, which is the 22nd book in the Bible out of 22 books that have a total of 22 chapters. And that's just scratching the surface, really, of why 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist, which is explained in other videos. Another video you should watch, a must-watch, a foundational video, is the prediction Kamala Harris's plane will crash on the date 10/17 equals Great American Eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. Okay, so that'll explain more the number 22. There's a lot more. But that's enough for this video to confirm for you that the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. And that's why it connects with this sign here. That's why God included this sign here, which is the Jamie Foxx sign, the release of the movie, Cloning Tyrone. Because the mark of the Antichrist changes one's chromosomes. And chromosomes are made of 2 arms, and a pair of chromosomes gives us 2 and 2 arms, which is another reason for the number 22. And Cloning Tyrone hints at that. It hints at the changes in chromosomes, right? Genetic information. And that's why Jamie Foxx is 666 as symbolism, as I explained earlier. And also, Jamie Foxx, as you may know, has been in the news for his health condition that was all of a sudden. And it is widely known among those that aren't brainwashed that the reason for his condition is because of him taking the mark of the Antichrist. And that is why it is 22 months to this Jamie Foxx sign, and the prediction will prove this. If you don't believe that this is rational or solid, case closed at this point, know that the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove what I am saying. That's what Jamie Foxx is for in his signs. That's why it connects with 22 months to this saints sign, this dome fire, the roof fire, massive judgment warning for the church on the opening of the UN, which was all about how the saints didn't play their opener of the season in New Orleans and on and on. But I'll explain more after explaining this. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, God pairs 23 and 44 together. Well, back from this state here, because it's 44 months back, but also it's 23 days back to the day that Hurricane Ida, Category 4, slammed into Louisiana. Okay, and as a result, caused the cancellation of the preseason game between the New Orleans Saints and the team from the 48th state. And that team isn't named the Phoenix Cardinals, it's named the Arizona Cardinals, and Arizona is the 48th state. And that is because the Antichrist is the 48th president. Michelle Obama will replace Kamala Harris after she dies in a plane crash. Michelle Obama will be the 47th president for 2 days this November before she makes Obama the 48th president. Okay? On November 21st, 2023. That's what God's signs are revealing. So that's why another confirmation that this is prophetic is the canceled game because of the Hurricane Ida was the preseason game in New Orleans between them and the team from the 48th state. Furthermore, Cardinals is a bird, and Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. Now, on this same day, at this time, the official institution, whatever it's called, the Maritime something, announced that there were a record 44 cargo ships stuck off the coast of California. Kamala Harris will die in her plane crash on the way to California, by the way, the 31st state. And anyway, this hinted at the Category 4 hurricane that was off the coast of Louisiana. Because actually the statement came on the Saturday, and on the Saturday it was when the Ida formed into a Category 4 and then hit the next day on the 29th, the Sunday. Okay, but the game was canceled and all that. And I forget what date the game was scheduled for. It would have been probably the Sunday. But regardless, it was connected with Ida. Now, the 44 ships confirms the 23 days connection, because 44 is a prophetic number God is using to hint at the Antichrist, the 44th president, who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball and will become the president again in 2023. So this is an astounding pairing of 23 and 44 that absolutely confirms this. Furthermore, the canceled game also connects with the dome fire on the Saints dome where they play. Okay, so that's further confirmation of the connection here. Okay, now what is amazing is Hurricane Ida in simple English. So gematria, Hebrew, Greek, and Roman letters are also numbers, and we can equate words or names into numeric value with such a system. If we do this with English, in simple English gematria, Hurricane Ida equals 111. And that'll be relevant, as I'll explain in a second, because it connects with 111 weeks and 1 day to this prophetic date here. It also, in English gematria, is equal to 666. And that's astounding because we're connecting with Oppenheimer, which is at 66, and on and on. Furthermore, that's Antichrist symbolism, and on the day, it was 44, a record 44 ships. And God uses records in his signs, by the way, for prophetic signs. So that's a confirmation that the 44th president is the Antichrist. The fact that in English gematria, Hurricane Ida equals this. And 666 and 111 and 440 all are second witnesses to each other. It's not just one isolated number here. All three of these numbers are gematria prophetically significant. In Hebrew gematria, when we convert Hurricane Ida to Hebrew, it equals 440, which of course, since it's the 44th president, the Antichrist 666. Okay? And I already explained it, so I can give it to you. So the number 11, again, symbolizes the promises of blessings and curses for America and the curses that'll come after it departs from God. Okay? So that's amazing. That's also confirmation of Ida. Now, also more confirmation of this is that Hurricane Ida turned into a tropical storm over the Northeast. And the National Weather Service issued its first ever, God uses firsts for prophetic signs, first ever flash flood warning. And there was the first ever flash flood in New York City as a result of Hurricane Ida. It killed 18 people, mostly in their basements in New York City. 18, God uses as a number to hint at 666, the number of the Antichrist. The 18th prime number is 61, and Obama was born in 1961. Okay, so that's why 16 people were killed in New York. Now, if I recall, it was on the 1st of September, and that would have been hinting at 9/11 as well, 9/1. But so that's more making this more of a New York sign, a 9/11 sign, and this is, as I'm saying, connects to the predicted explosions in Manhattan and the evacuation of Manhattan Island. Okay, and the flood in the Bible was an evacuation of Noah and his family, and Hurricane Ida is flood symbolism, as is the flood in New York. So again, this date with Hurricane Ida, the prophetic landing of it in Louisiana, which I didn't fully explain because it was exactly 4 times 4 years after Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Ida was the second most destructive hurricane after Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Ida canceled the prophetic football game. Hurricane Katrina canceled the prophetic, if you will, Mardi Gras, gay Mardi Gras festival, the most debaucherous, decadent festival in America. The gay celebration in New Orleans in the old French Quarter. And that was canceled as a result of Katrina. This was canceled. The game was canceled. So 4 times 4 equals the 44th president, who is a homosexual. And that connects to the 44 ships, exactly, because it was the same date. Okay, so 4 times 4 years. That's why Hurricane Ida landed when it did. It's because it was pointing back to Katrina, which in itself, as I said, God's big picture of signs is an interconnected web. That goes off onto another huge web, very important thing. Actually, well, yeah, never mind. Okay, so the 4 times 4 years also confirms pairs with the 23 days, and that's how God's big picture of signs works. Second and third witnesses confirming the signs and connections. Okay, 44 ships confirms the 23 days, as does the 4 times 4 years. Okay, so as I was saying, this sign that was a New York sign also connects with 23 days and then 22 months and then 66 days to this prophetic event in New York. That will be the follow-up judgment to the 9/11 judgment warning. Okay. Now this in turn, this date here, with the 44 ships and Hurricane Ida, with all of its symbolism, which includes simple English 111, is 111 weeks in between count. But it's, if you want, also 111 weeks and 1 day, which makes it 9/11, because the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs, patterns, and connections. From the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 11 symbolizes the execution of God's judgment and also God's promises of blessings and curses. And that's why 9/11. That's why the judgment warning occurred on 9/11. It was judgment for the promised curses. And so anyway, that's what makes this connection relevant, because this was the day of the Manhattan blackout. In Manhattan, the location of the 9/11 events. Furthermore, there was 9/11 symbolism in the Manhattan blackout prophetic sign. So much went on in this prophetic sign. one confirmation that it was a 9/11 sign, although was that it was exactly 110 minutes shy of exactly 42 years after the New York City blackout in 1977. Okay, now that blackout was for 9 million people, and it was over 24 hours, and that pairs with the 110, the 110 minutes shy. Okay, and that blackout in New York City was caused by an act of God. 2 of the transformers that go into New York City were taken out by lightning, and lightning symbolizes the Antichrist in the Bible. So the reason why 9 and 110 pair together is because 110 stories collapsed on 9/11, cracked and engendered an earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street. And Federal Hall is where Washington was inaugurated before he walked down or marched down Wall Street, which was named after the 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. And as he went from Trinity Chapel, marched down Wall Street into the, went from the Federal Hall, marched down Wall Street, the 9-foot-high Wall Street, into Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. And Trinity Chapel is known today as the Miracle Chapel because it was the only building that survived at ground zero that survived the falling debris, and did so without even a broken window because God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's consecration of the nation to God. And so anyway, that's why 9 and 110 are paired together. And so that gives us the 9/11 sign right there, because again, it connects with the 9 million blackout. It was exactly 110 minutes shy of an exact 42 years. Now, 42 years hits at 42 months, which is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy as being the period of the Antichrist. Also, 1977 was the year of Star Wars, and Harrison Ford, who was born in Chicago, where Obama was born, his Star Wars career spanned 42 years, from 1977 until 2019, which is the span between the 2 blackouts. And Harrison Ford's birthday was on July 13th, 2019, the day of the Manhattan blackout. And that was designed by God. It was also exactly 23 weeks after the Harrison Ford sign on the Super Bowl 53, and is also exactly 23 weeks before the prophetic kick by Harrison Butker. But that's too much to go off on to explain that. Okay, now, but the point is that, no, there's more here. So this was the day of Hurricane Barry, and this is very, very relevant because Hurricane Barry was known for the power outage that it caused in Louisiana on the day of the Manhattan blackout. Okay, and so Hurricane Barry, in other words, is known for the blackout that it caused. Now, Louisiana, it connects to this Louisiana hurricane, right? Which connects to this Louisiana hurricane. Barry is, of course, the name of Brock before he changed his name to Barry, Brock. Why someone would do that is a testament to who he is. That's quite something that an American, would change his name from Barry to Brock. It's representative, in other words, of his Marxist leftist politics. Okay, but so the point is that, let's see, Hurricane Barry was known for its power outages. It was 153,000, which is a number from the Bible regarding God's people. And it's a number that also symbolizes the second coming. The 153 fish that were caught in the net is symbolic of the end of the age of fishing for men in Jesus' last miracle. Okay. The blackout occurred in the area of Manhattan, largely from 42nd Street and to 72nd Street. And let's see, it was also 42,000 initially without power, it was reported at first, but then it was upgraded to 72,000. Coincidentally, same streets that it was in between, which is Hell's Kitchen. The name of the area is Hell's Kitchen. One of the signs on that day, too, was the Hades Town musical and the Come From Away musical. Both gave impromptu street performances, and Come From Away is about 9/11. So that was another 9/11 sign. Okay, and also on the same day was the prophetic explosion of a boat and fire on Table Rock Lake in Missouri. That's prophetic because there was the prophetic duck boat tragedy on Table Rock Lake. Table Rock Lake has almost the exact same water volume and exact same surface area, coincidentally, as the lake in Israel, the Sea of Galilee. And on that lake, the 153 fish were caught. Oh, you know what? All these years later, I only get it now. So it was 153,000 in the blackout in Louisiana because of Hurricane Barry. But this Table Rock Lake sign is about the number 153 because the duck boat tragedy in 2018 on July 19th was 17 people drowned, 9 from the same family, which is, quite something. And 9 times 17 equals 153. And again, Table Rock Lake was designed by God to point to the Sea of Galilee, where in the boat, 153 fish were caught. And the duck boat tragedy hints at that, but also this boat explosion also hints at that. Okay? Now, the duck boat was raised, so the duck boat sank just before sunset, and then 3.5 days later in the early morning, the duck boat was raised or resurrected from the bottom of the lake, which has a maximum depth of 220 feet, and on that same early morning, the 220-pound rock fell from the western wall on the prophetic 9th of Av date, and on and on. And the day of the sinking was the day that Israel passed its controversial Jewish state law bill. So it was all about Israel too. And again, Table Rock Lake has the dimensions of the lake in Israel. But I didn't realize that the 153,000, I should have, which is also flood symbolism, and it connects to the duck boat. The duck boat itself is symbolic of the ark. They look like little arks. And it sank, which is flood symbolism. I should have put that together before. Wow. Well, anyway, this boat explosion makes this Manhattan blackout also an explosion sign. Furthermore, it was the day of the Manhattan Henge, which is twice a year. The sun sets perfectly between the canyon walls of the skyscrapers. It's called Manhattan Henge, and it's best viewed from 42nd Street, which is, again, part of this sign here, the 42nd anniversary of the other blackout, etc. And so it was Manhattan Henge, and Manhattan Henge occurred during the blackout. So you had this dramatic scene with all the dark buildings and the perfectly set sun on Manhattan Henge. Well, God was using all of this to point to the upcoming explosion on the surface of the sun, which will cause food shortages, which will cause rationing of food, which will be used because of which there will be programmable digital currency that will be used to enforce the mark of the Antichrist and permit only to those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist the ability to buy and sell food. This is how it all happened. The predicted explosion on the sun, by the way, is February 22nd, 2024. And so anyway, speaking of explosions, so the boat explosion was on the same day as the Manhattan Henge, which is also pointing to the explosion on the surface of the sun, the coronal mass ejection that will knock out the nation's power grid and cause food shortages, and will also trigger the eruption of Yellowstone volcano 2 days later on February 24th, 2024. All right, so so again, this boat explosion, as I'm saying, in Manhattan, connecting with the Manhattan blackout, is connecting to the Manhattan dirty bombs explosions. That's the purpose here, too, of the boat explosion. It's to point to this upcoming through this trail that I just explained, which is very straightforward because we have the 111 weeks connection to Ida, which is equal to 111, and then 23 days, and then 22 months, and then 66 days, as I just explained. It's very solid. It's amazing, which is why I'm making the prediction. If it weren't solid and clearly confirmed with these multiple second and third witnesses, I wouldn't be making a video. Okay, now, the thing is, the Manhattan blackout was also exactly 923 months after the official beginning of the Manhattan Project. On August 13th, 1942 was the official start date of the Manhattan Project. This connects with 923 months to the Manhattan blackout, which again connects to the predicted explosions in Manhattan, which will be dirty bomb explosions, and dirty bombs are made with nuclear material, with a conventional explosive, and the Manhattan Project was all about the development of the first nuclear bomb. The reason why 923 months is extremely prophetic and relevant is that God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. It's one of the foundations of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, the fact that 9 and 23 are paired together. And that is because the basketball president who wore jersey 23 became the president in 2009 and will become the president again in 2023. Also, the number 9 is the most important number. It symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. Also, Grover Cleveland, President Cleveland, was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. He skipped the 23rd presidency, and Barack Obama will also serve consecutive terms after he will skip the 45th presidency. And 45 is the 9th triangular number. And so the two presidencies that will be skipped are the 9th prime number and the 9th triangular number. Also, the presidency that was skipped was that of Benjamin Harrison, and he was the grandson of the only grandfather-grandson presidents. He was the grandson of William Harrison, who was the 9th president. So the 23rd president was the grandson of the 9th president, which is another pairing of 9 and 23. The 9th president, William Harrison, died exactly 1 month after being in office, and that hints out how Kamala Harris will die in office, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist, who will serve non-consecutive terms. And again, I explained earlier how Michael Jordan wore 9 and 23, and on and on. Okay, and also Cleveland, speaking of Cleveland, LeBron James, the other GOAT, greatest of all time, which hints at GOAT Antichrist, because GOAT in the Bible is Antichrist symbolism. He also wore jersey 23 and played for Cleveland, and is famous for playing for Cleveland, and is famous for leaving Cleveland and coming back to Cleveland and to win the championship. And he's from Cleveland, right? And he came back after leaving Cleveland famously, making his big decision to leave, and then he came back in order to win the championship for Cleveland, and by doing so broke the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which had been in effect since the 1960s when Jim Brown won the Super Bowl for the Cleveland Browns. God is using Jim Brown because of the Cleveland Summit, which was also known as the Muhammad Ali Summit, when black athletes got together to discuss with Muhammad Ali his decision to conscientiously object to the dictate of the state regarding doing something due to his religious convictions, which is what God used to point to conscientious objection to the dictate of the Antichrist and Antichrist system to do something, which is to take the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, which is a spiritual abomination. One reason being, as I mentioned, it changes one's chromosomes. So LeBron James leaving and coming back, it's just like Michael Jordan, who left and came back. He famously retired in the middle of winning 3 championships and then winning another 3. He won 3 NBA championships, and then when he returned, he won another 3 in a row. And when he left, he played baseball for the Chicago White Sox and wore jersey number 45. 23 and 45, the 2 presidencies that will be skipped. And when he came back, he famously wore jersey 45 with the Chicago Bulls for 23 games, coincidentally, before he changed back to number 23. The last game that he played as a Bull was against the team from the 45th state, in which he scored 45 points while wearing jersey 23. Okay, so he came and went back. So in other words, the symbolism between the 2 GOATs that wore 23 in Cleveland and Chicago, them leaving and coming back, is symbolism for the skipped presidencies, which is hinting at the Antichrist, who is from Chicago, and how he will skip a presidency and return, just like Grover Cleveland, which is why the other city, Cleveland, with LeBron James. Furthermore, these 2 cities are connected with the I-90 highway, and that symbolizes the number 9, which pairs with the number 23. They're jersey numbers. Another pairing of 9 and 23. Okay, so you got the rundown. But that, again, is why it is 923 months from the Manhattan Project exactly to the Manhattan Blackout, which, as I just explained, is connecting to the date it is predicted that there will be dirty bomb explosions in Manhattan. It's absolutely astounding. Okay, now this date here, this Manhattan Blackout, which, by the way, was also the day of the prophetic 4.0 Manhattan earthquake. Manhattan, Montana had an earthquake, a rare 4.0 earthquake, which just happened to be 9 months and 11 days after the earthquake swarm began in Manhattan, Montana. And that's hinting at the Yellowstone eruption of the volcano there, because it's situated on top of the lava plume, Manhattan, Montana. And that will be triggered by the sun eruption, which is why it connects with the Manhattan Henge. It was on the day the Manhattan, Montana earthquake was during the Manhattan Blackout. Okay, and so, yeah, also Yellowstone caldera is situated at 9,203 feet above sea level, another pairing of 9 and 23. That's astounding. Furthermore, it's in the 44th state and on the 44th latitudinal line. Furthermore, actually, come to think of it, it's also on the 110th longitudinal line. And 110 is a number from 9/11. As I mentioned, 110 stories collapsed on 9/11 because of Joshua, who died at the age of 110 after the walls of security collapsed when they marched around Jericho, which is more confirmation for the 111 weeks in one day connection, because, of course, 110 hints at the number 11. Which gets us to this connection, come to think of it, which is 110 days. Now, on this day, again, there was the boat explosion, which is why this 110 days connection is relevant. This was the day that the barge, the historic barge that has been stuck on the Niagara River for 101 years, as in the 101 passengers that came over on the Mayflower boat, this barge has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for 101 years since the year of World War I. And it was 11 days before the 101st anniversary of the end of World War I at 11 a.m. on the date 11/11. This date here was 11 days before that. Anyway, so it's 110 days, and that's relevant because, again, it connects with the Manhattan, the 9/11 symbolism in the Manhattan Blackout. But before we go there, because this 110 days connects this boat explosion to this boat here, but let's just, before skipping that, this 27,000 days is also relevant. And it's exactly 27,000 days back to the day that the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Now, why Nagasaki and not Hiroshima, which was dropped before Nagasaki? Because Nagasaki was dropped, it wasn't planned to have been dropped on Nagasaki, but the city that they had planned to drop the bomb on was cloudy that day, so they decided to drop it on Nagasaki instead, which was designed by God, because Nagasaki is the home of the hidden Christians. The Portuguese converted some Christians back centuries ago, and throughout the centuries, there have been this small community, a minority in that region that have hidden their faith because of persecution. They're called the hidden Christians. Today, there is a hidden Christians monument, and when Pope Francis delivered his long anticipated for himself nuclear weapons speech in Nagasaki, he visited the Hidden Christians Monument. And that was exactly 666 days after UNESCO, United Nations, officially declared the Hidden Christian sites in Nagasaki to be World Heritage Sites. This obviously identifies Pope Francis as the first of the two antichrists described in the book of Revelation. Barack Obama is the second Antichrist. And no, Pope Francis is not the false prophet just because it's a spiritual thing, therefore it must be the Pope. Sorry. It's very clear that Rome is the home of the headquarters of the Antichrist system, and that popes have always been antichrists, and this Pope is the Antichrist. Anyway, that's another story. I could explain it more, but the prediction in this video, the purpose of it is to prove everything that I'm saying, the controversial things. Okay, so the reason for 27,000 days exactly is because this is also walls of security symbolism, as is the number 110. Because again, Joshua died at the age of 110, and he led the Israelites around the walls of security before they collapsed in God's judgment. Well, in 2 Kings, maybe it's 1 Kings 20:30, it was 27,000 men that died when the wall of security collapsed on them. So that's why this number is also relevant in context of walls of security collapsing in judgment, which was what was warned of on 9/11, and 9/11 took place in Manhattan, and 27,000 days connects to the Manhattan blackout, which connects to the Manhattan Project, which connects to the dirty bomb prediction in Manhattan. And so, and dirty bombs are made of nuclear material, and that's why Nagasaki connects in this extremely profound trail of signs to the date it's predicted that the dirty bombs will explode in Manhattan. That is astounding. Okay, back to the connection between the two boat signs. 110 days, that's relevant again, as I was saying, because of what I explained. And also, this day was also the day of the prophetic Maria fire that burned, according to Wikipedia, 9,999 acres. Okay, so that's like a news story. It's confirmed also if you want to look it up on Wikipedia. It's actually 9,999 acres Maria fire burned, and it was exactly 110 weeks. The Maria fire, and this date was exactly 110 weeks after Hurricane Maria pummeled Puerto Rico. Okay, and there was the prophetic evacuation in the middle of the night due to the threat of the dam bursting, which was symbolism for the water breaking and why it was on the night of the Revelation chapter 12 sign in the night sky, which depicted a birth. And just prior to Hurricane Maria hitting Puerto Rico, which is American territory, which is why it's a sign, because the signs are for America. That's why the signs aren't in other countries. The sign, America is God's Gentile nation. Anyway, before Hurricane Maria pummeled Puerto Rico, Spanish America, which hints at Spanish flu, which is what the Niagara Barge hints at, because the year that it got stuck, when it got stuck, was in the peak of Spanish flu, the year of World War I. Anyway, just before Hurricane Maria hit the Spanish America, it was said to have been dancing with Hurricane Joseph in the open Atlantic, which, of course, is symbolism for a conception, which is then followed by the water breaking of the dam sign on the night of the birth of symbolism in the night sky with the Revelation chapter 12 sign. So anyway, that's 110 weeks exactly to the 9,999 acres of the Maria fire, and so it's Hurricane Maria that connects to that, and that confirms in itself the 110 days connection, because again, that's how God's signs works, second and third witnesses. Okay, now in Revelation chapter 12, the dragon is ruling for 1,260 days, and that's why we have from this Revelation chapter 12 sign right here, we have, because it connects to the Revelation chapter 12 sign itself, we have this 1,260 days connection. Maria is a birth, which is also Revelation chapter 12 symbolism too, right? So 1,260 days gets us to this prophetic date, which I explain in the absolute must-watch East Palestine videos. So I won't explain it here. There's a few must-watch videos that are essential. All of them are essential. When the prediction comes to pass, you should know that you should watch every single minute of every video on this channel. But for the sake of saying it, there are some essentials of the essential. And one of those is the East Palestine video. And that regards the signs that occurred on April 13th, for example. Okay? And now, on that day, long story short, because it's a long story and it's amazing, but this was the day of the arrest of the 21-year-old document leaker in Massachusetts. The document leaking is symbolism for the leaking of the nuclear material or nuclear bomb that will be used in Manhattan. Okay, another sign was the Boston was having this prophetic year in their season. There's a number of other prophetic signs, which confirms the relevance of this prophetic sign involving Boston. And this was the day, let's see, it was the day that they broke the record for most wins in a season, I think. But anyway, they played Montreal on Montreal Island, which is a sign that God has used to point to the evacuation from Manhattan Island. Because Montreal, the evacuation, the exodus from Montreal Island of the Anglophones in the 1970s was the largest evacuation in North American history. Anyway, so it was Boston, Massachusetts, okay, and the score was 5-4, which is why it connects to the date 5-4, and that's for the purpose of pointing to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which is again why it was Boston and why the 21-year-old document leaker was arrested in Massachusetts, and 21 hits at 3 sets of 7, which is Joshua symbolism. Okay, 110 days again. Joshua symbolism because 3 sets of 7, because before the walls of security collapsed, the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7. They marched around the walls for once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day they marched around 7 times while 7 trumpets were blown. Okay, so anyway, long story short, we connect with the date 5-4, which again, one of the signs on this date, which is explained in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video. That's another essential video. So much information in that. Make sure you watch all parts of these 2 videos because there's actually multiple parts to these videos. There's so much information, but it's all amazing and all needs to be watched. One of the prophetic signs on this day was the 12th state that passed the law regarding 12 weeks for abortions, which was one of the hints at adding 12 times 12 days to this date to get September 25th, the date it is predicted that the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. Okay, so that's a long story short regarding this connection. Now, getting that out of the way, we come back to this Saints roof dome fire on the UN opening. Again, the Antichrist will lead the UN in its the Saints were the first year of the Saints was in 1967, which hints at Israel's first year after regaining for the first time Jerusalem, which will be what the UN tries to make an international city, the biggest transgression against God described in Bible prophecy. And that effort by the world will be led by the 44th president and the UN. And anyway, so that's also relevant here because anyway, we have from this date here, we have 7 times 7 months exactly back to the day that the eclipse passed over America, the Great American Eclipse, which was a massive judgment warning sign. It was one of the symbolic beginnings of the final 7 years, hence the 7 times 7 months, and also how the eclipse of the path of totality of which passed over 7 cities in America named Salem. It was one of the symbolic beginnings of the final 7 years. The other American eclipse that will pass over the path of totality of this eclipse, exactly where it peaked over the area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt and Cairo, Illinois, will be 7 years afterwards, which is more confirmation that the symbolic 7 years described in Daniel chapter 9 began in the latter half of 2017. And this is because the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ will be on the Day of Atonement, October 12th, 2024. And the reason why God has given me a voice through these predictions is to prove this. Case closed, end of controversy, end of debate. The Matthew 24:36 verse is misunderstood and as a mistranslation. No one knows the day, the most quoted Bible verse of all. And it's not true. Furthermore, many passages in the Bible contradict that. And the prediction being made in this video will contradict it because I am saying that the reason for the prediction that is from God and why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove to you that the second coming is in 2024, 7 years after this eclipse. And there will be an eclipse on April 8th that will pass over this eclipse. Okay, so 7 times 7 months after the 7 Salems sign is a 3 sets of 7, which confirms the prophetic relevance of this. And furthermore, So, and this date here, this eclipse that passed over Little Egypt is exactly 3,000 days and peaked over Little Egypt is exactly 3,000 days after Barack Obama, the Antichrist, went down to Egypt. So Isaiah chapter 31 begins with, woe to those who go down to Egypt, and it ends with a description of the Antichrist's defeat at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ. And anyway, right after he became the president, one of the first things he did as president was he went down to Egypt to deliver his famous Cairo, Egypt speech in order to tell the Muslim world that America is no longer a Christian nation because he is the Antichrist. And he grew up a Muslim. His mother was involved in an Islamic cult while she was in Indonesia, and that's not, you can find that on Wikipedia, okay? That's not actually a conspiracy theory or something. No, you can't find that on Wikipedia, I don't think. But anyway, so 3,000 days, though, that's relevant because after the Hebrews' exodus from Egypt, and we're talking about an exodus from Manhattan Island with the evacuation, after the exodus from Egypt, the 3,000 souls perished after their rebellion against God at Mount Sinai. And that's why it's exactly 3,000 days from when Obama went down to Egypt to this sign that points to Little Egypt, where the paths of the eclipses will cross each other, which will engender an X, which is the Tav mark in ancient Hebrew, which is, as I said earlier, is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, and the Tav letter is the 22nd letter. And so that's why we have this eclipse connect with 7 times 7 months to this date, which in turn connects with exactly 22 months, because the eclipses will engender an X over the country. Furthermore, X's are all about the midpoint. That's what makes an X. The mid date in between the two eclipses was December 14th, 2020, which was the day of the first administration of the thing, the mark of the Antichrist. That was the first day of it. It was also the day of the Electoral College when they voted on the shoplifted referendum, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. Okay? Which I knew, by the way, before even the referendum. I knew that Biden would win, and that the reason why he is losing his mind is because it's designed by God so that he would step down for Barack Obama to become the president, his old pal. I knew that even before the referendum. Okay, so anyway, that's amazing confirmation. Seven Salems, because Salem in Hebrew means peace, which is hinting at the removal of peace and security with this 3 sets of 7. Because again, not only was it a 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua, but it was really a 7 followed by a 7 times 7. They marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, it was 7 times while 7 trumpets were blown. Okay, so what about this? The day that Barack Obama went down to Egypt was exactly 574 months after he was born. This, in Strong's Concordance, the Hebrew word, the 574th word, appears only once in the Bible, which makes it extraordinary. In other words, more confirmation. And it occurs in Daniel 7:7, which is more confirmation because 7 is God's signature number that indicates his touch upon something. But furthermore, it connects with this 7 times 7 months later in this trail, which is relevant. But this word is used in Daniel 7:7. This is the prophetic book of Daniel we were talking about. Furthermore, the 7th chapter is about the Antichrist. But furthermore, this 7th verse of the 7th chapter is specifically about the Antichrist. And this word that is used in this verse is the word, the adjective that describes the Antichrist, which is the adjective that means terrible, strong. It's describing the strength of the Antichrist, this terribly strong beast that it's describing, which is a metaphor for the Antichrist. But it is the 4th beast, and we're talking about the 44th president here that's connected to with this. These two Barack Obama 44th president dates. It's connected with this number that hints at a description of the Antichrist. So that's making this solid confirmation. It's not days either, it's exact months. which further confirms it. Furthermore, it connects with the X, with the mark of the Antichrist symbolism and all of this, right? This is clear. Now, what also confirms all of this, because this is connecting to the dirty bomb explosions, so what confirms, in fact, this 574 months connection is the fact that we connect it back to nuclear bomb symbolism. The date that he was born, August 4th, 8/4, is exactly 8,040 days, 40 weeks, which hints at 8/4. 8040 definitely hints at 8/4. Barack Obama was born on the date 8/4, exactly 8,040 weeks after the first nuclear bomb was dropped in the test. And what is the name of that test? What's the name of that bomb? It's the Trinity bomb, which is God symbolism and Christ symbolism, and we are talking about the Antichrist. So his birth is connected clearly to the Trinity bomb on July 16th, 1945. And what this is all implying is that somehow this event will be part of the emergency crisis justification for Barack Obama to become the president again. Oh, 22 days after this, by the way, speaking of 22 months connection and the mark of the Antichrist, will be the day that Kamala Harris is predicted to crash in St. Louis near Little Egypt, where the eclipses will cross each other. And again, 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Oh, another thing too. So another thing too is that we're talking about Manhattan, the location of the 9/11 judgment warning. But what was recently learned is that the two towers are also symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, which changes one's chromosomes, because the two towers are actually symbolism for the two arms of a chromosome. It sounds strange, I know, but hear me out. This is proof. The Twin Towers, exactly 70 weeks after they were officially opened on the date 4/4, which hints at the 44th president in 1973, which was exactly 23 years, which hints at the president that wore jersey number 23, after the date 4/4 in 1950, which was the day of the UN Trustee Council officially recommending that Jerusalem be made an international city, of which Barack Obama will lead the United Nations in an effort to make Jerusalem an international city. Okay, so that's a connection that confirms that the date 4/4 1973, the official beginning of the opening of the World Trade Center, is relevant. But exactly 70 weeks later, and the most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy, and the 70th of the 70 weeks is the period of the Antichrist. And so that's why God uses 70 weeks connections. So exactly 70 weeks after the official opening of the World Trade Center was the day that Philip Petit did his clandestine sneak walk across the Twin Towers. He snuck up onto the top of the towers and walked a tightrope across the Twin Towers. And him walking across a tightrope with his balancing pole is symbolism for a cross with a man at the center, which is symbolic of a Christ. And so at the beginning of the Twin Towers, we have a cross. And when the towers fell at the end of the Twin Towers, there was the famous perfectly proportioned 20-foot steel beam cross that stood upright in the debris field, which today that cross is in the museum, the 9/11 museum, and that cross was part of how I came to faith, incidentally. So we have the two symbolic crosses at the beginning of the Twin Towers and at the end. But it was Philip Petit that walked across the Twin Towers. And he was also famous for walking across the towers of the Notre Dame Cathedral prior to this. But anyway, why petite? Because the small arm of a chromosome is named petite, for French for small. That's the name of the small arm of a chromosome. This is how, or why, or confirmation, how the Twin Towers are actually symbol. It's the World Trade Center, which is symbolic of the Tower of Babel and the world coming together and transhumanism technology, which is what the thing is, right? Anyway, which changes one's chromosomes. So anyway, the small arm is named petite. That's why petite. It confirms what I just said. Furthermore, the Twin Towers were replaced by the One World Tower, which hints at the Tower of Babel again. And that's why the One World Tower looks like a giant thing. If you look at the One World Tower, it looks like one of those things that are used to put the thing inside people. And that's why the Twin Towers were, because the thing changes one's chromosomes, and that's why the two towers are symbolic of the chromosomes. Now, two planes struck the two towers, which hints at 2 and 2, which hints at 22, which again symbolizes is the number that symbolizes the Antichrist. And so anyway, after this event in Manhattan, it'll be 22 days before it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash at the location where the two eclipses will cross each other, which will engender an X, which will be symbolism for pairs of chromosomes. And by the way, another reason why God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together is because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, and the mark of the Antichrist changes one's chromosomes, and there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now, the other thing that I wanted to get to here is that this dome roof fire for the saints on the day of the UN opening and the season opener against the team from New York, that game was played 12 days later on October 3rd in New Orleans in this dome, which there had been a fire on 12 days earlier. And the number 12 is symbolic of the church. That's why it's 12 days after this saints sign to this saints sign when they played the giants. Now, giants is symbolic of the Nephilim, which is symbolic of fallen angels, which is what aliens are. Aliens are, in fact, demons pretending to be aliens. And the reason for this deception is that it's a test of faith for the saints, because the majority of quote-unquote Christians today, when asked, will say that they are open-minded to the existence of aliens, which means that they aren't Christian. It means they don't have a biblical worldview. Period. That's basic. It's truly basic. And this is because this is judgment for quote-unquote Christians. That's the purpose of the end times and the Antichrist and the coming alien deception. It's because quote-unquote Christians today don't have a biblical worldview, a solid one, because they've got 1 foot in the biblical worldview and 1 foot in the world, 1 foot in heaven, 1 foot in the world. They're living worldly lives barely indistinguishable from other non-believers, the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians, which is why God is very displeased with them, and God needs them to get it, which is why the Antichrist and the test of faith, and furthermore, primarily the reason for the alien deception. It's time to wake these people up so that they start getting it, and so they start having a biblical worldview and start reading the teachings of Jesus and doing them. Enough with the nonsense of once saved, always saved, past tense, which is heretical doctrine rooted in Gnosticism, which I explain in the absolute must-watch, arguably most important video on this channel, especially if you're a Christian. Make sure you watch it, the 23 church signs video. Okay? Now, the reason why it's not possible for there to be aliens if the Bible is true is because the center of God's creation is man, and the earth is the center of the universe. And God became a man and died on the cross and was resurrected as a man to conquer death on the behalf of man. And God didn't hopscotch around the universe to other alien planets and do the same thing as aliens. So, you know, what is with... So they've actually done studies. There's been I've been interested in a particular professor that studied this in great detail and did studies and surveys, etc. And it turned out that the only group of Christians that have a percentage of them that will refuse to believe aliens when they come are fundamentalist Christians. And that word means simply that they have a biblical worldview. But the Catholics, the mainline Protestants, and the majority of evangelicals, they don't have a problem with aliens. That's because they don't have a biblical worldview. Furthermore, they're not engaged in the spiritual war. They're preoccupied with their worldly lives. They go to church once a week and they think they're good. They think they're already saved for that matter. And so they're not engaged with the world. They're not engaged in the spiritual battle, I should say. And that's why they don't recognize how dark the times are, and why they took the mark of the Antichrist, the majority of them, or many of them. Many Christians have taken, quote unquote Christians, have taken the mark of the Antichrist because they were not able to recognize the mark of the Antichrist because they were not engaged. They weren't living as Christians. And that's the purpose of the mark of the Antichrist. It's judgment. Because of this, because they weren't engaged and weren't knowledgeable about what was going on. And they weren't knowledgeable about what was going on in the world because they weren't engaged. They weren't fighting the war. If they were fighting, they would know, first of all, not to trust the mainstream media, and that is lying. And so they would already be getting their news from alternative sources, and they would know the truth about these things. Which is, so the root of it is that they weren't engaged, and they didn't have knowledge because they weren't engaged. They weren't pursuing knowledge. And as the prophet Hosea said, my people reject knowledge. My people perish due to a lack of knowledge. And because they reject knowledge, I reject them from being my priests, which is the reason for the judgment on the church. And the main theme of God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is judgment for the church, which is what I'm explaining here. All of these signs go through this saints sign right here. This is just one example. God's big picture of signs is judgment for the church. As Peter said, judgment begins with the church. God could end the age right now, but the reason for prolonging it is because the purpose of it is to wake quote-unquote Christians up. And of course, to bring many that haven't come to faith yet to faith. All right, now, and what does faith mean for that matter? Is it an intellectual assent to an agreement to something? That's the thing. It doesn't mean that. So someone who doesn't believe intellectually is in a sense no different than someone who does believe intellectually but does nothing about it. What's the difference? Right? So, and I know there'll be the comebacks with the reformed theology, which Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth, on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And this is explained in the 23 Church Signs video. But what I wanted to get at here is that 12 days after this Saints sign was this Saints football game, and the Giants symbolized the aliens. But the thing is, the first score in the game was scored by player number 12, and it was a 48-yard touchdown. Now, this player that scored it, his nickname is Speed Demon. That's his nickname. He's John Ross Speed Demon. His nickname is Speed Demon because he's so speedy. He's player number 12, and it was a 48-yard touchdown pass, which hints at the 48th president, the Antichrist, and that's why it's 12 days after this Antichrist sign here. Now, also, a big play in the game with the score at 7-7 was a 7-yard touchdown by player number 7, and a touchdown is 7 points. That's 3 sets of 7, clearly. And this was for the Saints. It's a judgment, 3 sets of 7 warning for the Saints. Furthermore, also, the Israelites took the promised land after a symbolic 3 sets of 7. So you could look at it in the positive light as well here. There is the rapture, the evacuation. Speaking of evacuation, the evacuation symbolism is also tied to the rapture, which will be the evacuation of God's faithful after a symbolic 3 sets of 7, which parallels the 3 sets of 7 when the Israelites took the promised land. All right. Now, this 3 sets of 7 confirms this 110 weeks exact connection to the date 11/11. First of all, 110 hits on 11 to the date 11/11. That's a confirmation in itself. But Joshua died at the age of 110, and Joshua is walls of security collapsing symbolism. And in that story, there's 3 sets of 7, as I've been explaining. This is how God's signs works. It's amazing. It's exactly 110 weeks from this prophetic 3 sets of 7 saints sign to the alien deception, which the purpose for which is to test the faith of the saints. Now, Also, this is amazing. This kicker for the Giants, Gano, in simple English gematria, his name equals 37. And his 37 kick streak, 37 field goal attempts without missing a field goal of 37, it ended in this game. All right? Now, the leader, the all-time leader, is the GOAT of kicking, greatest of all time, Antichrist symbolism, who is player number 4, who God has used in many other signs because he played for the Patriots and he kicked the winning field goal to win the Patriots' first Super Bowl, which was extremely prophetic right after 9/11. But he wears jersey number 4. He won 4 Super Bowls. He was a part of the his 4th Super Bowl win was part of the first Super Bowl with 2 black coaches, and they all wore black shoes. And it was just, I think, maybe it was 4 days, maybe not, though. It was just a few days, though, after the first black president announced he was running for president. But anyway, he was player number 4. This streak ended in week 4 of the NFL season. Player 44 had the record, and it's 44 kicks. So player 44, player number 4, his record of unbroken streak is 44 kicks. This guy's streak ended in week 4, and it was a streak of 37 kicks, and his number is 37. His name, his unusual name, which God uses unusual names to equate in gematria. Now, he's number 5, and 7 is God's signature number. 7 times 5 is 35, and it was a 35-yard field goal attempt, which is something he should have made, which makes the fact that he didn't make it more interesting. Oh, and one more thing. Oh, I forgot. The total points in the game was 48 points. So 12 days after, the total score was 48 points, and the first score of the game was this dramatic play by player number 12, Speed Demon, when it was a 48-yard touchdown. So that's another confirmation of 12 and 48. In other words, the 48th president persecuting the church, which is symbolized by the number 12. All right. Now, the Giants, which is symbolic of aliens here, which is why it connects with exactly 110 weeks to the aliens' beginning of the alien deception on 11/11, which is also, again, confirmed by 110. But the Giants scored 27 points, which is 9 plus 9 plus 9. And God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. The number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. But this 9 plus 9 plus 9 points that the Giants scored is an amazing confirmation of the exact 110 weeks. 9 and 110 paired together. As I explained earlier, remember 9,999 acres burned 110 weeks after Hurricane Maria fire. And the 9-foot-high wall of security the 9-foot-high Wall Street, 110 stories of the Twin Towers. So 9 and 110 are paired together. And again, the 9 million, 110 minutes shy of an exact 42 years. Okay, so 9 and 110 are paired together. The Giants scored 9 plus 9 plus 9 points, exactly 110 weeks before the aliens, which is symbolized by giants, begin the deception. This is absolutely amazing here. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the bitchute.com or the odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.